Welcome to the Overcoming Adversity podcast. I'm your host, Michael Allison. My guest today is Kelly Mendenhal. This woman has faced a tremendous amount of adversity with a disability, and she's here to tell us all about this story. She's an author and a speaker, and I can't wait to get into this conversation. Hey, Kelly, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hi, Michael. It's good to see you. Thank you for having
Absolutely.
me.
Thank you so much for joining me and being on the show, man. Obviously, it's a long time overdue, but I'm so happy to have you here.
We overcame a certain amount of adversity just to record this episode.
Absolutely, man. But I think in due time, and I think in time, probably will get some really great substance from your story, man, because it's one of someone that has been through a lot. You lost your dad. Um, you're someone that's now an advocate in the space that you're in with some of the disability challenges that you have. So I'm
Yeah.
so happy to get into that, man. If you can tell us a little bit about where you're at, where you're from, and a little about your story.
Yeah. So I grew up in Flint, Michigan, which is mostly known for Michael Moore documentaries and the Flint water crisis.
Hmm.
Um, I have a bachelor's in political science and English literature, and I have a master's in public administration. I wanted to do well for myself while doing good in the community around me. And so I really planned on spending my life working in nonprofit administration and fundraising and maybe some local or state politics. And in 2017, all of that came to a halt. And the identity that I had as a advocate and activist and as a nonprofit professional, all of those things were pretty much gone overnight, and I had to make a choice about whether I wanted to accept this sudden loss of mobility, accept that that was just what my life was now, and like surrender and succumb to those circumstances, or figure out how to turn my mess into a message and turn it into an opportunity.
Right.
I chose the latter, and um, yeah, it's been a crazy journey, but here we are.
Absolutely. So, along those lines, when you set out on a path that you created a plan, but obviously the plan got altered, right? What were some of the things that you were going through at the time, whether it was financial, was it some things with your family, was it with your friends? What was some of those economical challenges that you started facing?
Man, the ripple effect, okay?
Right.
Like, it cannot be understated. So I went from being a full-time nonprofit professional to taking short-term disability leave because I was having trouble walking, to eventually not ever being able to go back from disability or short-term leave. So that was in June of 2017. Um, the pain that I was in was otherworldly. It had completely taken over my life, and I could take small shuffle steps. I couldn't actually pick my feet up and take full steps or strides.
Right.
Um, I couldn't sit upright for more than a few minutes at a time. It was too painful, and it was pain in my back and also in my left leg. Eventually, my legs started falling out from under me. So I lived with a partner at the time, and his life was obviously greatly impacted by it.
Right.
We went from being a two-income household to a one-income household, and I was physically unable to participate in life. I in the years leading up to this disability, I had been uh, pursuing better health and had lost over 100 pounds, and I was wearing a Fitbit all the time. And I went from like 10 or 11,000 steps a day to 200 steps a day,
Wow.
if that gives you an idea of how little I was able to move. And so that impacts us financially, but then also he now has to take care of me. He's taking care of the dogs. He's working a full-time job. I mean, he wasn't a great partner, but that existed without my disabilities. With my disabilities, it became more and more toxic. So I was kind of trapped in a situation where I was experiencing a lot of emotional and psychological abuse and financial abuse. And I was literally physically trapped for a few years because uh so that was hard too. That's hard on me. That's hard on my family, my mom, my family watching from far away. I mean, they're all watching me suffer all this physical pain, but now also emotional pain. So there were a lot of interpersonal dynamics. The other dynamic was none of the doctors believed me about my symptoms and pain. So I was being gaslit and told that there was no way I was experiencing the things that I was. So I was fighting against the doctors. After 6 or 7 months, no, after, I'm sorry, 10 months of being unable to work and still searching for the answers, I started the application process for Social Security disability. That is a difficult process to say the least, but for me, because everything in my life seems to be extra and dramatic and always David versus Goliath, I had to sue our federal government to get my Social Security disability benefits. It was a 5-year fight, and a federal appeals court handed it back to my original judge and was like, this is not right. Here's your do-over. Uh, and I finally found resolution to that case in 2022. I was finally paid benefits for the first time in August of 2022, having not been working since 2017. So, you can imagine the financial destitution that comes with all of that, right? It was not small. And unfortunately, you don't get any kind of compensation for the years that you have to spend fighting a fight like this, right? So
Right.
it all said and done, it was like about it was just under $50,000 that I received for 5 years of my life,
Oh
which
wow.
helped. But like people assume when you fight a fight like this that you get like some big,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Big
not.
lump sum, right? Wow. So, for the period of over 5 years, it sounded like you were in a very very tough situation because you were with someone. I'm not sure if you're still with that person, but
No, I am not, thank God.
but but it's kind of like you're now trapped in this situation, and now you're dependent upon this person, and now they know they have this leverage over you. It seems like you're taking so much advantage of it, and I know that could have been mentally draining for you, knowing that
Absolutely.
you were once a person that was moving around doing your thing on your own and all these things, and now all of a sudden,
Fighting for other people.
right.
Yeah.
So that's
And
the
then
crazy thing to hear that within that story, man. That's crazy.
yeah, so that was a lot. There were a lot of different dynamics, and people will say things like, "Well, but you could have figured a way out. Like you eventually got out." And it's like, I got out after 4 neurosurgeries and 2 abdominal surgeries in 22 months.
Wow.
That's what it took to get me back literally on my feet and able to walk again
Hmm.
and uh be independent again. So January of 2021, my last big my I had a medically necessary hysterectomy, which was my last surgery. And uh that was in October of 2020. So in January of 2021, I came back to Michigan from Tennessee and started over. And but I would have been homeless if my family and friends had not kept coming up with ways to help support me. For the first few months I was in Michigan, I was in hotels and things, and it was just me and my dog, Petunia. And all I packed was like the most important paperwork, as many clothes as I could fit, and the dog stuff. And so it was rough. And then it was a 6-month period. It was June of 2021 before I went back to Tennessee to retrieve my personal belongings with my mom and a moving truck, just us, a moving truck. And
I know about that moving stuff, man. It's not fun.
it is not. And when you have a lot of metal in your spine, it does not get better. So there were challenges, right? Because I can't pack up boxes and move like for the rest of my life. I'm supposed to lift maybe 25 to 35 pounds max. So like moving furniture and moving boxes and doing all that, going up and down stairs, that wasn't physically accessible to me either. So I had to do the best I could with what I had. That being said, I've done a pretty rocking job at that.
Yeah.
I as you mentioned, I did, I don't know how I kept going sometimes, but I
I,
did. And
I actually want to ask you this question because you said something pretty interesting that initially you had to convince the doctors about your situation, but
yeah,
then eventually that did happen, right? So
yeah,
then if you could talk a little bit about going through, because you said you went through surgery for 2 years.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's not easy just to say that and not think about it
No,
for 2 years.
no.
So tell me a little bit about what the process was like when someone tells you like you're not disabled, and then what was that like to go through that process now of dealing with this? Because I could imagine that's just like excruciating.
It's a lot because a lot of it was a grieving process. And if you think about losing a loved one, a very close loved one, God forbid your significant other or a parent or anyone that is very very close to you and you lose them, if you've experienced that, imagine that internalized and now you're grieving yourself. You're
Right.
grieving everything you had dreamed for your life, everything you thought you knew about your life, all of these pieces of yourself. I was always like, my friends called me the punk rock Martha Stewart because I was always cooking and baking. I'm covered in tattoos, but I'm always cooking and baking. And I'm a writer, I'm an artist. Uh, but all of that had been kind of buried under survival mode for a long time, as far as like surviving the nonprofit sector, which is a
Right.
whole nother episode. Um, I call myself a recovering nonprofit professional because you put so much of yourself into that work and there's not a lot of room for self-care. And I feel like that definitely contributed to the degradation of my spine and things. But what it looked like for me, um, on the bad days, I was screaming on the floor, like sobbing and screaming, "Why am I doing this? What is the point?" Because I just felt like I was running myself into financial brick walls, legal brick walls. Um, and some days it was firing doctors, having to confront doctors, calling nurses out directly when they would like I would get accused of being a med seeker a lot, probably because I was young. I have a lot of tattoos. They're very visible. And so I had a nurse one time say, "So where else are you going for pain meds?" And I looked at her and I was like, "Did you even read my chart? Because I don't take narcotic or opioid pain meds. And
Mm.
this is the only doctor that's prescribing anything to me." And I had to do that a lot, and like it sucks. You have to defend your character. You have to prove you're hurt enough and you're sick enough. It's angering, it's maddening, it is dehumanizing. But unfortunately for women, it's really common. So there's an implicit bias against women reporting chronic pain and other invisible illness symptoms. It happens to men too, but it's far more likely to happen to women. When you consider women of color versus Caucasian women, even worse. Women
Hmm.
of color by far have it the worst when it comes to medical gaslighting. To me, it's all rooted in our uterus and and uh hystera, the Greek word meaning hysterical, associated with the uterus. We have been treated since the beginning of time. Like, we are hysterical beings because we have a uterus,
Hmm.
and that has carried through. So we will say our pain is a 10, and doctors will assume we're exaggerating or being
Hmm.
dramatic, being melodramatic. So um one of the problems that I faced was that doctors were only willing to look at one section of my spine because of where the bulk of my pain was. So they would only take images, CT scans, x-rays, and MRIs of my lumbar spine. I kept asking for full spinal MRIs, but I was not granted the request. And so what finally happened in 2019 was I got to the right neurologist who got me to the right neurosurgeon. They communicated together, and they compared notes on what they were seeing, and what was found was that I had a very rare ruptured disc in my spine, in my rib cage,
Hmm.
right where the bottom rib is. It's it's a very rare place to rupture. That part of your spine is not mobile like the other parts of your spine. Your neck and your lower back are flexible and you bend and things. Your thoracic spine is not meant to do that. So to have a rupture there is very rare. On top of that, I had a centralized rupture. So normally when a disc ruptures, it will push out to the right or left side of the spinal column. And so when they do those scans and things, they can see that rupture. Mine was a centralized rupture, which is very rare, meaning that it went directly to crushing my spinal cord. It ruptured the bone mass, the bone cells grew into a mass, and it was crushing my spinal cord and deforming it. It took 2.5 years to figure that out. So it took 2.5 years to figure out that that's what was happening in my spine. I also needed a fusion in my neck. And then I went through 22 months worth of surgeries
Wow.
from 2018 to 2020.
Kelly, let me ask you this. When the doctor sat down with you and you was going through this process, did they say, or did you think that any of this was attributed to from anything that was from from like your family, or was it something that you were doing, or was it something that you were eating? You know, sometimes I know the doctors bring some of these things up because they normally ask you that
Yeah,
with their
it
questionnaires and things like that.
it's so funny that you asked that because none of my doctors bothered to ask about any of my physical health history or my family's physical health history, whether or not things like this run in my family. And I say it's interesting you say that because right now I'm going through the process of genetic testing
Hmm.
because after 7 years, they still haven't figured it out. So I've been doggedly looking for answers, and I'm being genetically tested for a connective tissue disorder. Um, and specifically, they're looking at something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. There are 14 variants of it, but it has to do with how your body produces collagen. And if doctors were communicating in a more holistic care space with patients, if there might have been ways for them to figure this out, but I put it all together because of the support groups that I've been in, the symptoms that I never knew were weird, that I had friends speak up and say, "Hey, that's not a thing. That's normal." Like my ribs moving all the time. My ribs pop out of place. My top rib likes to go up into my collarbone. I have applied kinesiology I have to go to twice a week because my organs like to move up into my abdomen. My bones shift out of place constantly. And no one ever bought like I've said to so many doctors, why is my body so extra? Like, why is this happening?
Oh my
And
God.
last year, I looked at a neurosurgeon and I said, "You just told me that my spinal fusion has not fused as much as we would like to see. And my whole spine is lit up with inflammation that is unexplained. And I already have, it's only been 3 years since my spine, or 2 years since my spine surgery, and I'm already having adjacent segment disease. What is causing my body to break down like this?" And he said, "You're probably never going to know that, and you just need to be okay with it."
Wow.
And I was like, but if I don't know why this is all happening, how do I get the best quality of life moving forward? At the time I was 40, I'm 41 now. When my spine fell apart, I was in my mid 30s. What does the rest of my life look like if I don't look for answers, right? And
Yeah.
that's something that's for people living especially with chronic invisible illness and disabilities, that's a really real question that we have to think about. And like my therapist will say, don't go down that road because you don't know what medical stuff is going to happen in the next 20 years. You don't know what advances will happen. You don't know this, you don't know that. But it's very hard not to think of that because now I have a family. I have my partner Jeff. We were reunited after 20 years. I had a crush on him in high school and we're together now. His kids are our kids. I love them to death. And we kind of rebuilt our lives after COVID together. I was having a mental breakdown. He was having a mental breakdown. He was drinking. I was dealing with PTSD. And when we were reunited and I came home in 2021, it was like I being in his presence was like waking up from a nightmare where you've been running from a bad guy for so long and then you
Mhm.
wake up and all of a sudden the bad guy is gone. That's what it feels like to be in Jeff's presence for me.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it's so amazing. And I get emotional. He's so his kids, there's a 16-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl, and I love them to death. And I try not to put them on blast too much because they didn't ask to have an author, artist, adult in their life. But um I remember when the oldest, when I first came home, he said, Miss Kelly, I just want you to know that I know logically that I've never known you before, that you were not, I know you and my dad hadn't seen each other in 20 years, but it feels like you've always been here and like you're always supposed to be here. And
Mm,
so what has happened over the last couple of years is I have done a lot of healing with the love and support of my person. He's also done a lot of healing. And now it's like I moved into this new space. I used to spend a lot of my energy on raising awareness about medical gaslighting and things like that. And that's still important. But when I first started writing about it in 2018, it wasn't even a word. Nobody talked about it.
right.
So the awareness for that is much higher. So now I like to focus my energy on helping other people cope with living with chronic disabilities and invisible illness and coping with fighting with your doctors. And I a big part of that for me is art, and so I share art with other people, and that's kind of like where I'm at today is um my mission is to spread more love and joy to other spoonies or people living with invisible illness everywhere through the written word and lovingly handmade art.
Let me ask you this, Kelly. So you had to have gone through a pivotal moment to have this transformation to the point of you finding someone new that's in your life and supporting you. But you said something that really triggered something for me to ask you this. You said you were in survival mode. And
Mhm.
being in survival mode, I'm a veteran, so I think of like what that puts me in the mindset of, right?
Yeah.
And I was also thinking about what you said about seeking and trying to identify like where did this all stem from and where this all come from, and then when you go into the different doors they keep closing in your face and stuff like that. Can you talk to us a little bit about you seeking trying to get that peace of mind when you're trying to get out of this survival mode, and what did that look like for you mentally, emotionally, and physically until you found this person that helped you find that? Because I know some of our listeners could be struggling and in a very dark place, but if you can't
Yeah.
talk to us what that was like for you and how did you get out of that dark place?
Yeah, I'm always very honest that in the early days of my journey for that 2.5 years while I was fighting and I was in so much pain. And people ask, why didn't I take meds like narcotics and opioids? And that was a personal choice on my part because I felt like if we masked the symptoms, we wouldn't find the root cause. I want to say everyone needs to make their own care choices. uh I'm very adamant about that. As a disability advocate, we all have to make our own care choices, but for me, there's a lot of addiction on both sides of my family. I already lived with PTSD and depression before any of this happened, so for me that was the safe choice, I felt. um but there were sacrifices to my mental health for that, and I was living with suicidal ideation for years, on a daily basis, and that is very difficult to fight. I am blessed that I have uh, an incredible network of friends and family from childhood to present day, college, and everything in between. I have friends that I can call and say, I'm having suicidal ideation. I don't want to die, but I don't want to live like this anymore. And they would say, do you have a plan? Like, I was lucky because like working in the nonprofit world, I was connected to so many people who are social workers and caseworkers and working with under-resourced and at-risk communities, and I was doing the same. So I had an awareness to myself that not everyone has. I started my therapeutic journey for all my PTSD and everything when I was 19. So I was kind of like ahead of the game in some senses. And I had spent my career advocating other people, so it became easier to advocate for myself. But the biggest coping mechanisms I had were talking. I never shut up. If people call me an oversharer, I don't care. Because when you keep secrets and you hold things inside, like that's the toxic stuff that eats you from the inside out. I had a therapist who always used to say that. She said, we all are dying from things that eat us from the inside out because we're shoving all of this pain down into us and down into our guts. And then we wonder why we're sick. And so I never stopped sharing. I always talked about it, whether it was in my blog, on a Facebook post, on my podcast. I always talked about it. When I first started talking about it, I didn't realize that I was going to become an advocate. I didn't realize when I first started the journey that I was going to have so much difficulty getting help. So podcasts became a huge part of my self-care because if I had something to focus on and listen to, it would bring my attention away from the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And hand stitching and creating and writing. When I wrote my memoir and published it, I mean, it was like I was releasing all this pain and like buried stuff through my fingertips as the words were pouring out onto the page, and it was so cathartic. And it let me let go of a lot of the shame that I had been carrying that wasn't mine to carry. And so I was able to put so much down with that, that it gave me the mental space to keep fighting present day. Um, Hand sewing for me is the number one coping mechanism because it becomes like a meditation. I always say stitch, breathe, stitch, breathe. And I when I'm making something, I'm purposefully, because I believe energy, we're all energy and we're all exchanging energy all the time. And so I don't want my anxious energy to be what pours into these projects. I think positive things. I ask the universe, help me get this to whoever needs it the most. Whoever this will touch the most, let it get to them. If I'm making it for someone specific that's ordered, like a customer or something, and I know a little bit about them, then I'm thinking positive things for them and their family while I'm stitching it. Um, and that being able to channel my energies into creating so much beauty out of so much brutality and pain was definitely what saved my life. And that's why I talk to others about it, and I'm trying to like stop. I'm trying to get rid of this like old lady craft stigma when it comes to embroidery and hand sewing work, because um I think there is a transformational quality to art and creating, and that it can be life-saving. And yeah, I don't that's really I tried to focus as much as I could on those creative endeavors because that's what gave me joy. And I think we don't lean into joy enough in this life,
I agree with
es-
you.
especially in survival mode.
I agree
We
with you.
don't lean into joy.
So, Kelly, you said something that I speak about all the time, and it's about breaking the bottle. And we conceal so much on the inside, and we're just dying on the inside. I love that
Yeah.
you said that. If you can, you mentioned something. You wrote a book, and
Yeah.
um, it's called "Skin in the Game: The Stories of My Tattoo." The stories my tattoos tell. If you
Yeah, it's
can
a
tell
mouthful.
us, if you can tell us a little bit about your book and what can our readers get from your book.
My book is I say it's a book about survival, uh human connection, false steps, and ascension, because I'm very honest in my book that I am a flawed human being. I have made ugly mistakes. I have done ugly things from places of pain. But I've always tried to be the best person that I could be and have a positive impact on the world around me. Um you will read everything in my book. My book has something for everybody. Okay, so I literally tell my life story through the stories behind several of my tattoos. Every chapter has color photographs of my tattoos that accompany it. Whether you have the ebook or the paperback, or whether you listen to my podcast, because I did turn it into a podcast. Think like an audiobook mixed with a live author reading from a woman who can't remember most of what she wrote, because I was dissociating from the pain so much. I don't
Uh-huh.
remember a lot of my book. So I've been reading it in its entirety for the first time with my podcast audience, which I think is a really unique experience. And so you'll hear things like my throat clearing and me turning pages, and I'll laugh at something that I wrote, and you get all those live reactions. But I talk about surviving. My dad passed away 3 days after my 4th birthday, after just 6 months after a cancer diagnosis. My mom was 29, she had 3 kids. She didn't have a high school diploma, and she was a widow all of a sudden, so she started a custom drapery business in our house and was able to be an at-home mom and create and generate income. That's probably where I get this whole, like, perseverance, creative, outside the box, entrepreneurial thinking from, is my mom. So I talk about that journey. I talk about growing up in Flint. I talk about surviving my second stepfather and my 2 stepbrothers, uh, who were physically abusive toward my mom and I. I mean, honestly, my therapist calls it my Vietnam period. They weren't just abusive; they terrorized us. And it was like 3 years of my life that we all lived in the same house, and that was a struggle. Sexual abuse and assaults, and I even talk about, and I know this can be a taboo or uncomfortable topic for people, but I am open and talk about having an abortion at the age of 28 and what that was like and how that happened and what the emotional impact of that was. And then I talk about my career in nonprofit and trying to be the change I want to see in the world, and how that I was kind of disillusioned one organization at a time, ultimately leading to the point where I became disabled and stopped being able to work. So here's the interesting part. That book ends off in like December of 2018 when I'm getting my spinal cord stimulator implant. So
Hmm.
all the rest of my surgeries and everything haven't been told yet. So that's my next mission,
So part
is
two
to
is
talk
coming.
about,
The next
yeah,
book is
yeah,
coming.
yeah, yeah. And it's, I listen, I tell people all the time, it might feel heavy in some parts, but if you can stick, if you can wait, there's like a happy ending, you know. There I don't believe in,
I appreciate the honesty. I don't want to read someone's book and they're sugarcoating stuff. So I appreciate
yeah.
the authenticity of someone just being real.
Yeah, yeah, and I try to tell people that because there are I mean, there are a lot of triggers that can happen in the book, but overwhelmingly the reviews and the feedback that I get is, um a lot of women have been hiding a lot of the things I was hiding, and they felt like they didn't have to carry shame anymore, and like they didn't have to hide anymore. Um I I've gotten a lot of, "I love reading your book because it's like hanging out with you." It's like everybody who knows me well is like, "Your book is literally like sitting down and having coffee with you and listening to your stories." Like, and I love that. I want my readers to feel that connection and to feel that they are sitting down with a friend and talking about these things. Um it it is intense, I mean, I made it out alive.
Most
You know,
definitely. Most
you know
definitely.
there's a happy conclusion at some point. I'm still
Kelly,
kicking it.
Kelly, you were a true survivor because we've spoken about what took place with the disabilities and things like that. But I know that from what you had shared is you're a woman that experienced a lot that probably compiled onto when you got into that disability phase based off your childhood trauma, the death of your dad,
Mhm.
and some of the things that took place with your siblings and step family members and stuff like that. So I can
Yeah.
imagine one that's carrying this weight ever since 4 years old, all the way till they're in their teens, till their
Yeah.
20s, and now this added to that. If you keep stacking that up, if you keep stacking that up
Listen,
and,
listen.
and it's not going anywhere, it's set to explode. It's set to go somewhere. That energy is set to be put someplace else. And I will say that it took whatever situations you've been through, but you're here to survive and talk through because I would say that you was going through that in survival mode, as you said earlier.
Yeah, and that's complicated, and and not everyone has an appreciation or understanding of that. There so a lot of people when they think of PTSD, they think of like a single incident or situation or combat. Um a lot of people ask me, "Did you serve?" And I'm like, "No." I hate that cuz like PTSD can happen from all kinds of things, but complex PTSD is when a person like me has had multiple different like major big T traumas at many different points in their life, or a reoccurring prolonged uh period of that survival mode. And I have survived several periods of living in survival mode like that. It not without, it takes its toll. It's not without its side effects, or you know, my PTSD comes from, like you said, a combination of like death, uh the
Trauma.
physical experiences and trauma, domestic violence, abusive relationships. I was in some pretty severe car accidents starting from a young age. And that means my triggers are not always predictable to me.
Right, 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 right.
And I like to talk about this because to me, in today's world, there is a lack of personal accountability. To me, this cancel culture lacks an area for growth and personal accountability because we turn everything from an on like it could be an honest mistake or it could be hate, but everybody's identifying it as hate. And this cancel culture perpetuation is really taking away from the idea of personal growth. Conversations and dialogue need to be had in order to achieve things like personal growth. Being stagnant is never going to facilitate personal growth.
Right.
And I'm I'm like, we need to identify our triggers, but we also need to take responsibility for our triggers. No one else is responsible for our vitality. No one is coming to save us. We are responsible for our peace and our vitality and our health. And that means, I believe, three pillars of health: emotional, physical, and spiritual. Whatever that looks like. I'm not saying you have to be any one religion or not another, but there has to be an element of spiritual health. And I'm just not a person who can sit around and let my brain turn to mush. Like, I started I started writing essays for contests in elementary school about the Bill of Rights.
Mhm.
I did Model UN in graduate school, so I basically dressed up and pretended to be international diplomats from other countries. Like, I love learning and growing, and I do not do well without having like plans and objectives, which my disabilities have helped me come to much better terms with that. I've had to come to accept and honor my own physical, emotional, spiritual needs and limitations. And we all have our own, but we have to take responsibility for them because no one is coming to save us. And I think, I really think that it's important. I don't always know when a trigger is going to hit me, but when a trigger hits me, I have to have self awareness enough to be like, I am emotionally reacting to this situation in a way that is not called for. Like, this is an emotional overreaction. I'm safe, and I have to start grounding myself.
Right.
That's my responsibility. Nobody can do that for me. Uh, Sometimes I think we walk around expecting the world. I'm not saying the world shouldn't adapt some, because 25% of our population in the US is disabled. So, like, i- inclusion and accessibility are definitely needed. But we have to take responsibility for our health. And um, there are so many ways to access help from home now, if needed, that there's really very little excuse for it. Um, if you have the right resources. If you're in an under-resourced or underserved population, it's different, but you can still find a way. Give it a goog, man. Like, I had to figure it out. You know what I'm saying?
No,
Like,
I agree with you. If you can, Kelly, as we get ready to wrap up,
yeah.
you've turned all of your challenges into a superpower. So you're now a speaker. You're now someone that's super, super big on disability, mental health awareness.
Yeah.
Can you share with our audience, some of the key lessons or some key takeaways that they could take from your story, man? Because I think it's so impactful. You're filled with tons of knowledge, tons of experience, right? If you can't share with them some things that they could take away, man, that it could start having an impact in their life, man, because your story is truly, truly phenomenal.
The number one thing I would say is that I never had any reason in front of me to believe that it was all going to be okay,
Hmm.
but I did. And what I can tell everyone now, on the other side of everything I've experienced in the first half of my life, is that I would do it all again and suffer through it all again and relearn the hard lessons if I knew that it was going to put me right here, right now, where I'm at, with the peace I have in my heart, with the love I have in my life. I would do it. Um, there were many days I questioned whether or not it would all be worth it. And it is. It was and it is. And it still is. And it just keeps getting more worth it. Like literally every day. Like I'm not exaggerating. It could be years from now before you find yourself sitting in the seat that I'm in to say that. But I promise you, it will come as long as giving up is never an option.
Mm,
And I know that seems easy to say. I know it seems easy to say, but my only other choice besides fighting for all these things and making it here was giving up, becoming permanently paralyzed or even dead. And I wasn't down with any of those choices. So please don't lose heart is my number one message.
absolutely. Kelly, if anybody wanted to work with you, book you for a speaking engagement, or get a copy of your book or anything, how can they get a hold of you?
KellyJMendenhall.com. You've got it flashing across the screen right now. Uh, and I've got contact forms and things, but if you want to send me an email directly, please feel free to do that. It is hello@kellyjmendenhall.com. And you can find me on all the socials. I'm an easy lady to find. And check out the Affordable Art Revolution, where everything that is not custom or personalized is pay what you can or name your own price to make it more accessible for other disabled folks everywhere.
Absolutely. Kelly, it's been an honor to have you on the show, man. Your story is one of truly, truly one that never gave up, never quit on himself. And I believe that's a true testament to your character and who you are. I've listened to a lot of people's stories of overcoming adversity, and I've seen some, and yours was one that truly, truly sticks out. So just thank you for coming on here and sharing
Thank
this.
you.
Absolutely.
I appreciate being on. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So before we get out of here, any last words?
I don't know. I you said that and I wanted to have something brilliant, but I couldn't come up with anything. So go figure. The writer is speechless. Who do?
It's all good. It's all good. Well, guys, we hope you really enjoyed this episode with Kelly Mendenhal, a woman of true, true, true inspiration. If you find some joy in her story and you feel the urge to share it, make sure you leave a comment, but definitely give us a thumbs up. Until next time, God's bless.
Can't complain at all. Couple dollars in my pocket, no income and go. Been working on my body, getting healthier. Thank God for clarity.